highly recommend anyone. Sorry. And then first, I know I messed up.
Sorry. It's just funny hearing it come out of your mouth because, like, I know what the that feels like, where you're just like,
Yeah.
So it has been about a week since I posted my video where someone said I look like a teacher coming back to a bad sub note. That was the best comment I've gotten in a while. And yeah, I was having a sad time. It was sad boy hours. A lot of us were not happy with the way that iPadOS 15 turned out. And I got a lot of comments on that video, like 700 plus, and I just thought that, talking about this is a good thing to do as of right now. And no, it's not like the worst update, and no, it's not the best update, but I thought I would consult a friend of mine who uses iPad even more than I do, honestly. He's like the king of iPad, I think, on the YouTube platform. Ladies and gentlemen, you might know him. Welcome, Christopher Lawley. How you doing, Christopher?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
And yeah, the other night I called, or the night of WWDC, I called him a little, pissed off. I'm not gonna lie. And he described what he said. He walked me off the ledge, and I think that a lot of us need to do that right now because it's not all bad news. The iPad Pro is still a fantastic device, but some of us think that it needs a little more oomph, and some of us, like Christopher, have sort of seen other positive or more positive things come with this update, allegedly. How that goes. So yeah, today we're going to discuss sort of what's in store for the iPad Pro based off of our speculation. We're not going to pretend like we know exactly what's going to happen, right, Christopher? Like, we know how, YouTubers promise things. We don't want to give you false expectations.
Yeah. We are not promising anything. This is no.
Because we all were, we had our hopes for WWDC, and a lot of us were just sort of, dropped right on the pavement, if you know what I mean. So we're going to keep it real. We're going to just, have realistic expectations, realistic speculation. But yeah, let's jump into this discussion, Christopher, shall we? Let me pull up the talking points that we have to sort of give us some structure here. Mm-hmm. First and foremost, I want to bring up the M1 chip and the marketing surrounding that. And I guess I'll start by saying, I'm a Mac user primarily, although I do love iPad, and I have seen what the M1 chip can do. In this laptop in front of me right here, this is the M1 MacBook Pro. It is a 16 gig model, identically spec'd in many ways to the top-end iPad Pros. And I do all of my 4K video editing on here, multiple streams of it. That's going to be the case for, this video. Actually, I'm going to be doing multicam. And although it's not perfect, and although we can expect a lot more from Apple in terms of, new Apple Silicon, this thing is incredibly capable. And I think the fact that Apple threw the M1 and the iPad Pro meant something more than just throwing like an A14X. And though the M1 is essentially that, I guess the marketing and the expectations with this chip are different, considering just what YouTubers and what the press have shown that this can do. And of course, not everybody's a video editor, not everybody needs, Final Cut, although a lot of us want it. But still, what do you have to say about the marketing surrounding the M1 chip and how that may have disappointed iPad users, post WWDC?
So I think the biggest thing to keep in mind about the M1 chip is it's actually what the A14X chip would have been. So if we jump back a little bit, Apple's been making their own chips since the iPhone 4, and then they started, they put them in the iPad, and there was the A number X variant of that chip, and it keeps going up and up and up with every new model and stuff like that. Then we got the A12Z in 2020, which was actually the A12X, but with one of the bin GPUs enabled. A lot of times when making GPUs and CPUs with cores, not all the cores are working, so they disable one in software. So what ends up happening with the A12Z is it's still the A12X, it was just enabled an 8th GPU core. So that was basically the same chip. Fast forward to 2020, Apple announced the M1 chip for the MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, and Mac Mini, and now it's in the 24-inch iMac, but they also put it in the iPad Pro. That's just the A14X rebranded, so maybe the marketing name wasn't the best around that, but it's the chip we would have gotten in the iPad, whether Apple went away from Intel to their own ARM chips or not. Like, either way, it's the chip we would have gotten.
And yeah, and I think that's a great point because logistically speaking, why would Apple make a different chip? Maybe an A14X that's less powerful because, if they can order, let's just say, 10 million of these chips from TSMC, they should, And it wouldn't make, like I said, it wouldn't make any sense monetarily to create another chip that would perform worse. You know what I mean? So why not put the same chip in everything?
It would cost more money to make a different chip for the iPad Pro because you would have to develop all that. You would have to have a whole nother SKU of chips being made. So why not take that same really great performing chip that's in the Mac and also put it in the iPad Pro, let alone that I'm sure it was always, scheduled to go in the iPad Pro despite what the name of the chip is.
Yeah, and if you think about it, like I just thought about this, like I remember benchmarking like my Intel MacBook Pro 13-inch compared to my iPad Pro 2020 last year, and they performed similarly. But nobody really, I guess, complained about how the iPad Pro couldn't, run Final Cut Pro or act more like a Mac, even though they were performing similarly on a Geekbench level, let's just say. But I guess, coming from someone like me, a Mac user that wants to get into the iPad ecosystem more, and honestly, I've been trying to. I'm using the iPad Pro a little more. I'm trying to sort of see how it can, do more for me beyond just being like a good notes device. Honestly, that's kind of what I use it for mostly. But I guess what I'm getting at is, this year, having seen how much the M1 chip can do, I guess I would argue that Apple has to be, aware that they're creating, or they're just raising people's expectations in terms of what their devices should be capable of. So if the chip in the Mac can do so much, people expect to get the same from an iPad Pro that they might be paying even more for, especially with the Magic Keyboard and an Apple Pencil. I mean, if you think about it, I got this MacBook Pro here spec'd out, with the exception being storage, for like $1,700. Similarly spec'd iPad, you're forced to get 1 terabyte. And even then, the iPad by itself, I think, is $17.99. If you want cellular with it, it's $19.99 plus the Magic Keyboard. That's an additional $350 plus the Apple Pencil. That is another $120. So it's like, going over the $2,000 price range. So, that's why people are upset. They ordered this, iPad with, I would hope, realistic expectations that Apple would do more. And that kind of brings up another topic here. You were talking to me about how COVID may have impacted their development. What do you, like, what's your view on that?
I mean, COVID has impacted everybody. Like, if we think about this last year, people ended up having to work from home that they weren't used to. Big chunks of their day were taken up by making sure their kids were, set up for schoolwork and stuff like that. I don't know a single person that honestly feels they were as productive last year as, say, in 2019 or something like that. Like, I know I wasn't as productive last year. So, I want, people to just kind of keep in mind, just keep a realistic expectation of, the people that are working on iPadOS and iOS and all that stuff, they're still people at the end of the day. So they only have so much time in the day, just like all of us. Now, I'm not here to make excuses for Apple. I'm not here to apologize for Apple, but I consider myself to be a realist. I want to see the world for what it is. I'm not trying to put a positive light or a negative light on anything. But last year sucked for everyone. Let's just be honest. It sucked for everyone. It probably impacted iPadOS 15 in a huge way, especially if you look at the stuff that they probably wanted to have in iPadOS 15 versus what they could actually ship. I'm sure there's a big difference there. Again, I don't know anything for sure, but like everyone else, I was around last year. I saw how last year affected people. It was not a positive thing. So I would definitely say COVID probably made a huge impact on what shipped versus, what didn't ship.
I mean, and we know that for a fact because if you look at a lot of the features in iOS 15, especially with FaceTime, they're very Zoom-like, so you could probably imagine what was going through their heads. People were using Zoom and WebEx and whatever else that, they use. And also, too, I just thought about this. I remember an article talking about how Apple's now requiring their employees to come back to campus, at least the infinite loop, like the circle spaceship thing, that building. They're requiring their employees to come back 3 days a week. So, especially in a state like California that had, very, I guess, large COVID-19 legislation happening to help people, deal with that in their own way. People are just getting back to work there. So, even though they're Apple, even though they have $1 trillion in the bank or, whatever that means, in assets, they're still a conglomeration of people, and they can only do so much, especially like you said, taking care of their kids, taking care of their loved ones. So, we have to keep that in mind as well, while at the same time, holding, I guess, Apple accountable. Not in like an indignant way. We're not like fighting for, anyone's rights or anything, but like, you know what I mean? Like, we need to, have realistic expectations, but also have expectations, because if we don't, then we just would be fanboys. We would be people just going like, oh yeah, like it's all great and everything's great. Even though, I mean, especially in my opinion, it's not all great, and there's places they can improve. But I'm happy that I have Christopher on here, because he has, I guess, more of a nuanced, balanced view of this, as we should, because hating on Apple and loving them way too much, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't push innovation, or doesn't push for features and hardware that actually benefits people like us. So that's
I think after this last year, people just have a little bit of empathy. Try and see things from other people's perspective. Just a little bit of empathy goes a long way.
I know it's hard. I know it's really hard for people, but yeah, that's something that a lot of people have sort of lost. In the past couple years, but especially in the world of tech, this community has never been like toxic or problematic. I hope that we can look at things from a more, I guess, independent or nuanced light, because I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I was upset on Monday. I was very upset, like a lot of other people, and I read a lot of comments, and also people were excited, and this sort of kind of brings us into our discussion about pro apps like Final Cut and Logic. There was one pro app that was launched with iPad, and that is Swift Playgrounds. We were talking about this the other day, and even though I'm not a developer, and Christopher here is maybe knows a little bit more about it, but isn't a developer himself, that's very exciting, and a lot of developers are really happy that they can create apps purely on their iPad. But, a lot of us who do video editing, we're very sad to not see any mention, any nod to Final Cut Pro. And, before I continue talking about pro apps, Apple's a company that wants to make sure they do everything they want to do a stellar job before things are even out. And of course, like the developer previews, are going to have problems, they're going to have bugs, but by the time the public beta is out, everything's going to be ironed out. It's going to be pretty much I guess in terms of just like everyday operation, you know what I mean? Like things aren't going to like completely conk out, right? Like, or give a different experience.
I would say the public beta is still very much a beta, and stuff can be buggy, which means it's a beta. You can lose data and stuff like that. So don't go. My blanket statement to people is don't install the betas on a device you need for work or something you rely on every day.
Listen to Christopher, guys.
iPod Touch, if you have an old iPod Touch, iPad, something laying around in a closet you're not being used, go for it. Put the beta on that if you really want to play around with it, but don't put it on your everyday device. I mean, betas kill battery life because there's just a ton of stuff running it. It's not optimized yet. Just betas are betas for a reason. So if you need something stable, wait until the fall when it's officially released.
Yeah, okay. That is more than a fair statement. And see, this is why I consult people like Christopher amongst other YouTubers, because I don't always know what I'm talking about. So that's true. But I guess the point I was trying to make is that Apple wants to make sure that things work really, really well, or well enough before they launch them. And that's why I don't think we saw any other pro apps now, because of the impact that COVID had. But I think some of us, and I was telling Christopher this, that we would have liked to have seen at least maybe a hint, a trailer, something that would sort of reassure iPad Pro M1 buyers that they didn't just buy something for nothing, or they're not at the mercy of like third-party developers, which developers are making great apps. Christopher here uses LumaFusion for everything, in terms of his video editing, workflow, and we can talk about that. But I guess from someone like me, I would have liked to have seen at least a nod towards that. So what are your thoughts on this, Christopher? Because like I said, you are very much into the iPad app ecosystem and the like.
Well, I would say the first thing, and you kind of touched on this, is Apple doesn't announce anything until it's ready. So when Final Cut does come and they announce it, it's because it's ready. I would also say a lot of times when iPadOS versions and iOS versions and macOS versions, all this stuff gets announced, new APIs are added. And for the non-developer people, basically APIs are bits of code. Think of them as like tools. Say you need like a Phillips head screwdriver for something, but you don't have one. Well, maybe they add an API. They'll add an API to the OS that gives you a Phillips head screwdriver. So those kinds of things can unlock potentials for new apps in the future. And that API analogy I know wasn't that great, so don't at me. So there could be some stuff in iPadOS 15 that Final Cut or Logic needs to be in the OS before it actually ships. Now, keep in mind, what they announced this last week was the developer preview. This was, hey, developers, this is what you can work on. Not what, obviously there's stuff in there like users can use and stuff like that. And then I think Apple did a really good job of balancing the keynote between developer and user-related stuff. But what ships in the fall is all for the users and stuff like that. So I could see them and again, I know nothing, I'm not promising anything, but if Final Cut is coming this year, I think personally it makes more sense for it to be announced in the fall and ship in the fall after iPadOS 15 comes out or right around that time. That just makes sense to me. Now, again, not promising anything, I'm just hoping here, and I'm kind of reading between the lines of like stuff I've seen, and it's just like maybe, but also like I hope to see it. I really do want to see Final Cut on the iPad. Like Noah says, I use LumaFusion for everything. It's a great app, but I'd love to see some kind of competition in that space. On the Mac you have DaVinci and Premiere and Final Cut and Avid and all those others. But right now on the iPad, all we have is LumaFusion. And while I still think it's a good app and it's got a lot under the hood, I'd like to see options in the future. So there are absolutely pro apps on the iPad right now. You have LumaFusion, you have Ferrite, you have Procreate, you have Lightroom, Darkroom, Pixelmator, Photo, Affinity
iPad
Photo.
exclusives, honestly. I mean, like stuff that you really can't run on a Mac properly. So you're right. Yeah, you're actually right. Like there are professional apps that people use on the iPad Pro that are exclusive. So you still have a reason to buy an iPad Pro, but I guess in some ways, like I guess with the M1 chip, not as much of a reason because like we can't necessarily take advantage of all that power yet. We do have to wait for like what, for example, LumaFusion developers decide to do with all the extra RAM, even with the 5 gig app limit and stuff like that. Also, what you were saying, a lot of great points. You made me think about how the iPad Pro 2018 came out, and nobody really knew what to do with it, and then like what? It took 6 months for them to come up with an update that actually made it make more sense. And if you think about it, like the iPad Pro 2021 models were launched in the spring, and from like the end of April to like September, that's about 5-6 months, right? So maybe that is sort of a pattern we can use to although like very carefully speculate that there might be pro apps in the fall, there might be more consumer software coming, or maybe not consumer, but other than developer software coming. That we don't quite know about, kind of going in line with what I said about how Apple only ships or talks about stuff that is actually put together, because I mean they're not going to like Cyberpunk 2020 or 2077 us, they're not going to come out with like a half-baked like game. That's not them, because if they did that, they would lose all credibility, because they're all about refinement. That's what they sell. They sell the ecosystem, they sell iOS and iPadOS and macOS, and people buy the software, blah, blah, blah. So I like the point you were making. And I think maybe it was flawed for me to say in past videos that like, oh, well, the iPad Pro 2018 was launched and then it got sort of corrected with iPadOS 13. I kind of forgot about how much time occurred in between then and then that update. It was like 6-7 months of just sort of limbo as to like this iPad just sort of running a glorified version of iPhone OS, right? So I think we have to be patient,
And development takes time too. Apple doesn't release hardware and software updates at the same time. I mean, typically there'll be like some kind of minor software release when new hardware is put out, so like all the drivers and stuff are supported properly on that new piece of hardware. But like there typically isn't major software features released when new hardware. That stuff is disconnected. And I know a lot of people don't like that about Apple. I find that to be fascinating, mostly because I'm a YouTuber and it gives me more stuff to talk about throughout the year, which is pretty selfish. But yeah,
don't worry.
Just one really quick thing. I don't sleep on Swift Playgrounds. Like, Swift Playgrounds is Apple's true first pro app for the iPad, and I'm really excited about it. I've dabbled with app development in the past, and honestly, I have an idea for an app that I think I'm going to try and work on it solely in Swift Playgrounds and see if I can just make it in Swift Playgrounds start to finish.
And yeah, that's like I said, that's great for developers, great for people who can actually take advantage of that. Because like that's been sort of a dream that people have had, to work on apps, not just on a PC or a Mac. But yeah, I guess that sort of concludes our discussion on Pro apps. I don't think you have anything else to say. I mean, we talked quite a bit about them here. Our next topic of discussion has to do with extended display type features with the iPad Pro. And with the implementation of Thunderbolt, a lot of us thought like, hey, maybe Apple's going to be doing something more with that this year. And that's something a lot of us have been hoping for, because while mirroring your display onto a external display is okay, especially with cursor support and all that, the fact that the iPadOS, window isn't like scaled properly for the aspect ratio of most displays, it's kind of frustrating. So I guess I'll start with, what you think, Christopher. Like, what do you think? Like, why didn't we see that? And like, what do you expect that to look like if it ever comes to fruition?
I will say this is the feature I'm probably the most bummed about, because I use an extra. It's literally just out of frame right here. I use a 32-inch monitor every single day with my iPad. In fact, I have a desk setup video coming soon, so be sure to subscribe. Sorry, I just had to.
You can plug
I'm a YouTuber.
Man.
I mean, you have to do the subscribe thing. Anyways, no, I use a monitor every single day with my iPad, and it crops it, or not really crops it, but it mirrors it at 4:3, which is what the iPad's aspect ratio is. And this is always a bummer, because I would love to really take advantage of that full 32-inch display and have Windows or something like that, because that would be really nice. And especially with the power of these iPads, I could see it being disconnected. So the apps you have on the external monitor can be different from the apps that are on the iPad. It's not mirrored, which isn't anything new. Laptops have been doing that forever. But that's kind of how I would like to see it implemented. Now, maybe one of the reasons why we didn't get it this year is it's just not ready. Like, maybe they are working on it and it's just not ready. Because, again, Apple doesn't ship anything until it's ready. They don't announce anything until it's ready. So we have no idea what they're actually working on. So this is why I'm not, like, upset publicly. Like, I'm just like, I actually like a lot of the stuff that's in iPadOS 15. And there's a lot of really cool things that weren't announced on stage that people aren't technically supposed to be talking about, but they are anyways. That's fine, whatever. I'm not gonna, whatever, you do you. But there's a lot of cool things that, when the public beta and all the other stuff comes out, I'm really excited to kind of dive into and check out. But yes, I wish we would have gotten external monitor support. It's probably the feature I'm the most bummed about.
Yeah, and you made a great point. Like, it's probably not ready yet. I mean, Craig Federighi himself, the man, the myth, the legend, the person that some of us are willing to have our lives ruined for. I'm keeping that. I'm gonna put that tweet up like for like a second, in the editing. He said to Marquez in an interview that, like the reason why Apple hasn't implemented a calculator app into iPadOS is because they just don't know how to do it great yet, so they might still be, thinking about how this is going to look, because, they do have to make the Mac line competitive. And that's sort of our next topic of discussion. They want to differentiate the two. And honestly, I figure that until they launch a Mac with a better chip on the inside, they might hold off on doing that. A, because things are not ready and they want to refine. But B, they want to keep the iPad Pro sort of in its own lane, because they're trying to grow the Mac market share right now, and a lot of people are buying M1 Max, and rightfully so. They're fantastic devices. They're going to have a lot of longevity. My sister is going to probably buy an M1 MacBook Air because she dropped her Intel one just in time. So yeah, like, you know, it's a good time to buy a Mac, and Apple might not want to jeopardize that right now. But I guess what I'm getting at is, and I'll ask you this, Christopher, how do you think, you know, an extended desktop or like a enhanced iPadOS, you know, more Mac-like experience would impact, you know, Macs and how they sell?
Well, a couple years ago at WWDC, I believe it was 2019, they addressed this. They said, Craig Federighi was on stage and was like, hey, we're going to address something. Are you merging the Mac and the iPad? And they put that giant no that's become a meme in the tech world. And I truly believe that. I truly believe the Mac is the Mac. It is their traditional computer platform, and the iPad is the iPad, and that's what they see the future of personal computers being. Now, the Mac is still around because they understand that the iPad isn't in the place where it could take over for everyone. And it may never take over for everyone. But if you look at, like, kids coming up, they had that What's a Computer ad campaign that people still comment on my videos saying, and it's hilarious. Like, it's very funny. But it's true. There's a lot of kids coming up these days that have never used a traditional computer. Computer is an iPad. And that's where I kind of see, like, there's this differentiation that, no, the iPad is not going to get Mac OS on it, nor should it get Mac OS.
No.
And the Mac isn't going to get iPad OS, and nor should it get iPad
It wouldn't
OS.
make any sense. It'd be a disgusting experience. Because I was thinking about this, like, you know, this morning or last night, really, I was imagining what Mac OS would look like on my iPad, and I wouldn't want it. It would be weird. I don't know how it could work. But they have to think outside the box as to how, you know, Mac-like features could work on an iPad while making it distinctly iPad, as they should, because people are buying iPad for a reason. It's not a Mac. It's an alternative. It's an incredibly versatile device. I mean, Christopher and I know this. We have talked about this device for years. It is sort of the basis of our channels, you know, like, so, you know, we're definitely both excited about iPads, even though we use them differently. I would say Christopher takes a more holistic approach. I take a more, you know, like, specific approach in my schoolwork and more like whiteboard or writing or note-taking type tasks. By the way, shout out to Paperlike. They sponsor us both. They make the best screen protectors for, you know, writing in notes or, you know, sketching and drawing. I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested in that. But anyway, yeah, like, I totally stand by that. You know, I hope they don't merge the iPad and the Mac. And I've said that in the past, like, maybe they will. But, you know, Christopher just reminded me, you know, I think they're going to keep them distinct products. And maybe one day, one of them's going to die off. We don't know quite yet what that's going to be because, you know, it's only 2021. I figure that will happen at the earliest 10 years down the line because, you know, who knows what kind of tech is coming in the future. But that's a whole separate topic for another video here. That sort of makes us move on to the next topic here. What are some iPadOS 15 features that you like or don't like, Christopher? Of course, very generally speaking here.
The new multitasking, I think, is killer. I did a video a couple years ago about how multitasking works on the iPad, and I got some comments from people basically saying they didn't even know slide over was a thing. And because it's not very discoverable at all, and I don't blame them at all. So the new multitasking with the menu bar button at the top is going to make multitasking more discoverable for just general iPad users, which anytime something's more discoverable, 2 thumbs up from me. Also, there's keyboard shortcut support for multitasking features like going, like jumping between apps and going into the app view. So I think there's a lot of really cool things coming as far as multitasking goes. The other thing, for anyone that works on the iPad, I always recommend learning shortcuts. Shortcuts is Apple's automation platform, and in WWDC, they announced that this is going to be their automation platform for all their platforms, including Mac OS now. So this is something really important to learn because it can help speed up your workflow on the iPad. And Shortcuts is getting a ton of updates. Looks like we have a new editor coming, some new actions, file-based actions, which I'm really excited about, and just a whole bunch of other stuff that I think there's a lot in this release. Also, the other thing, too, that's a killer feature, Notes popover. If you take the Apple Pencil, swipe up from the bottom right corner, you get a little notes field. You can handwrite a note, type a note, whatever you want. Yeah,
Like that's
and
that's
then
super cool. Also like that text, like how you can like sort of drag text into that off of websites in Safari.
Yep.
That's really cool. And even though I'm more of a good notes person, I figure that when I'm out and about and at school, yeah, that's going to be a great. Is it, like, what's the feature called? Like, I don't think it's popover. I'm not trying to correct you. I'm not trying to be a Karen.
No,
like,
it's not
Hold on.
popover, but I'm totally blanking on it off the top
let me
of my
look it
head.
up. I got you.
have-
I'll save you here. Hold on. iPad.
Quick
it's called
Note.
Quick
Quick
Notes. Yes, Quick Note.
So
Very-
Quick Note is the name of that. Quick Note. I totally messed that up. It's not popover. It does a popover animation, but it's Quick
Yes.
Note.
It should be called
one really-
Popover.
Popover would be a great name.
More exciting
I
than
would
Quick
get it
Notes, though.
right. But the other thing that's in there is if you have like an email or a web page or something with content on the screen, there'll be a little plus button at the top with the name of that. You can hit that, and it just quickly links to that in the new note. So you can tap on that when you're in notes. You can tap on that, and it'll launch it back to that email or web page or whatever.
And when you reopen those like web pages or specific like things associated with that quick note, don't they pop up as well? Like there's context to your notes.
Yes, I believe so.
But of course, we'll be doing proper demos in July. When the public beta. Like I said, like the reason I brought up the public beta in general is that it's for the public. Obviously a beta is a beta, but earlier versions
Yeah.
do have more bugs. So that's a version you should be semi comfortable with. Installing on your device. Although, again, like Christopher said, if you are making money on your device, if it is like the basis of your business, don't do it. Like don't
Yeah.
jeopardize your ability to use your Mac or like in terms of data loss and in terms of functionality. Like always keep the most up to date, real full-fledged version of whatever on your Mac. It's not, or just any device, it's not worth the extra features, I would say. Like for example, I'm not installing Monterey on my MacBook Pro because if something goes wrong, I literally don't have something to edit on. So
Sorry, the California in me has to correct you. It's Monterey.
go ahead. Monterey.
One of my favorite things about being living in California and being from California is every year when Apple releases their new Mac OS deal, I have to teach like 15 people how to say whatever the new OS name is. El Capitan was my favorite because people would call it El Captain, and then people would hear that people from California would call it El Cap, but it's like you have to be from California to call it El Cap.
It's like the iPhone X situation. I had a friend over the other day. Shout out to Diego. I know he's watching this. We talked about this video. We were sitting talking about the Mac, and he's like, so I installed Mac OS Big Mac on my. I'm like, what? He's like, I mean, Big Sur. I'm like, oh my god. So yeah, it happens to the best of us. I don't know. I'm like Monterey. I'm just some guy from Michigan. So pardon me, Christopher. I'm sorry I didn't pronounce your precious mountain or whatever it's based off of the right way. But we have Great Lakes here. We have Indian or Native American names that you would know how to pronounce, and so. Anyway, no, we're just it's funny. Tech YouTube is so unproblematic. Like we have to pretend like we have beef. Like there's nothing like I have nothing but love for my. Fellow tech YouTubers like Christopher here and Isaac, Knoopsey, and of course, Brad and others. So it's great to talk about these things. And I think that kind of wraps up this conversation here. Like we said, don't hold us to anything. We're not trying to, ruin your day again. Although I hope we didn't, we just were sort of basing our, speculation off of just patterns that we've seen in the past. But this is a weird year. And I guess this is a weird year following a very, very weird year. So we've yet to see what is in store for iPad. It's not all bad. It's not all good. But, I'm glad we had this discussion because it shouldn't be one-sided. Like I don't think that, iPadOS 15 ruined the M1 iPad Pro. Not calling out Max Tech. They make great stuff. But I have to say I do disagree with that video title.
Yeah.
But it definitely... left people thinking that they wanted more. And I don't think that feeling is invalid. But like Christopher said here, it's a great update. We cannot wait to jump into that when we can, when the public beta comes out. And that's about it here. Christopher, do you have any other final thoughts?
No, thank you so much for having me on. Seriously, guys, there's a lot of great stuff in iPadOS 15. just because we didn't get a couple of key features, some YouTubers, including myself, that wanted. There's some stuff I'm bummed about that we didn't get, but the stuff we did get, I think, is going to be hugely impactful for more iPad users than external monitor support would be. I think there are a lot more iPad users that will now take advantage of multitasking because it's easier to discover than external monitor support, because how many people are actually plugging their iPad into an external monitor?
Right. Well, I would say I think that if that feature was a thing, we'd see more of that. But as of right now,
probably.
it's kind of crappy. But yeah, you Christopher was saying that this update is more of a quality of life type thing. Same thing with iOS. There's a lot of great little nifty features that came with that. Although, I'm not going to say like this was the best WWDC ever. I really like 2019's WWDC better.
Same.
But this is just not every year is going to be a home run for Apple. They can only do so much. But again, we're not making excuses for them. I'm going to have a lot more content that's going to be more critical. That's just sort of how things go. We want the best for this company. Obviously, we're here to tell the truth about these products. And because we love to use them. I love to use them. Christopher loves to use them. And we want what's best for you as well. And I guess we have a little bit more leverage there to sort of talk about things like this. So it's like what is it, like tech justice here that we're doing. We're trying to make sure that your voices are heard and that we can convey consumer needs to Apple in a nuanced and informed sort of way. So yeah,
I like to think of it as tech realism.
Realism.
Like,
yeah.
you got to have a realistic approach to what's actually possible in a given time frame, especially right after. Well, I mean, it's still happening, but with a pandemic going on.
Yeah, and that's very important. You have to look at all the angles. And once again, thank you, Christopher, for coming on here, for walking me off the ledge, because I'm in a better place than I was last week. Christopher said like, oh, I don't want to sound selfish. Of course, YouTubers are going to sound selfish. I wanted more features with iPadOS 15 because that impacts this as an operation. I wanted to talk about more, but this sort of situation sort of helps me to be more creative and to think of other content. So it's a nice change of pace. And we know we're all doing well. I'm alive. We're healthy, we're vaccinated, hopefully, and everything's fine. But still, tech realism, that's a great ideology or a worldview within the world of tech. So we'll stay tuned. Stick with that. We'll stick with that, and that sort of indicates that I should stop talking and go lay down, because a lot of people in the past have maybe commented about how I don't look like I'm the most fit person, and I know that, and which is why I'm going to the gym, and I almost died on the treadmill today after 2 days of pretty intense muscle workout for someone who doesn't have any to begin with. So yeah, we're gonna end things here on a more positive note. Thank you again, Christopher, for being on here. We're gonna talk more. I hope to do more content like this with other YouTubers as well, so we'll see that. Hopefully we can do sort of a recap or sort of a council type video going over or just going over everything that we talked about with other YouTubers who use iPad Pro like we do. So yeah, that about wraps things up here. I hope this video was helpful. It was definitely a long one, but hopefully you found this reassuring. And yeah, other than that, I'm Noah, and this, of course, is Christopher Lawley, the one and only. Subscribe to him, and I will catch you all in the next one.